welcome back. Thank you for joining us today. Carter and I are here together again to walk through lesson 3 of the Up to Me program with you. This is the third and final lesson of the program. Just so that you all know, there is a booster that is available for this program, which is meant to follow up with you after a month, just to see how things have gone. So you may be eligible to participate in that depending on whether or not you're participating in our research study and how you were assigned in terms of your group. So lesson 3 is called Telling Your Story. So now that we have weighed the pros and the cons of disclosure and then considered different ways to disclose and different people to whom one might disclose and in what settings, now it's time to really think about how you want to tell your story. And so there's 4 tasks that are a part of this lesson. Actually, I think it's 3. Let's see. Is it 4?
I think it's just 3. I didn't see a 4th one.
Yeah, that might be a little typo in the workbook, but that's okay. No big deal. So there's 3 tasks, and I will make sure that I'm identifying them accurately here. The first task 1 is how to tell your story. And I'm going to go through that task with you in a moment. The second, task 2, is called How Did It Go? So once you've practiced telling your story, how do you think it went? And then the third, task 3, is called Putting It All Together. In here, task 2 looks like it's identifying peers who might help you with the coming out process. I'm not sure exactly what happened with that particular task in this lesson, but that might be a remnant for an older version of this program. So we're going to go with what we have right here in front of us. So again, task 1 is how to tell your story. And there are several learning objectives associated with this task. The first is you're going to read through an example of how to tell your story of your experience with mental illness. This story is from a young man named David Goldberg. And then you're going to use the provided guide, which is one of the worksheets that we have, to construct your own story of your experience with mental illness. And then finally, you're going to understand the values and the issues related to telling your story. So right now, what I'm going to ask you to do is on page 32 of the workbook, you'll see table 3.1 is titled David Goldberg's Story. Pause your video now and go ahead and read through that. It's several pages long, so it might take you a few minutes, but when you're ready, unpause and we'll return to the lesson. Okay, now that you've read David's story, I would encourage you to just take a few moments and reflect on a few questions, and these can be found in your workbook on page 35. What you should think about, reflecting back on David's story, is what are some of the things that you liked about his story? How did it reflect a story of recovery? What's very important is that, when we share our stories, we're getting something out of it personally ourselves, but we're also communicating about what the reality is, that people living with mental health conditions are just like everyone else, right? And so one of the important pieces to reflect is that recovery is possible. And so it's not all about these are, I've had a lot of challenges. Of course, that's part of it. But the recovery piece at the end is really important too. Think about what parts might have been particularly hard for David to tell. And then is there anything that you might have said differently? Was there any part of David's story that you would have maybe said in a different way or delivered differently? So pause your video now. Take a little bit of time to reflect on those questions. There's nothing for you to fill out there. It's just kind of a thought exercise. And then unpause and we'll come back and start on worksheet 3.1. Okay, so again, as usual, you should have received a link to an electronic version of the worksheets. And worksheet 3.1 is a template that helps you to basically craft your story. So it's fill in the blanks that guide you through crafting your story. So if you want to go ahead and open up that worksheet, you'll see that worksheet 3.1, it's called A Guide to Setting Up a Story About Your Experiences with Mental Illness. So on the first line, and there are instructions in the workbook. If you ever forget and want to redo this, you can always go back to them. And those instructions start on page 35 of the workbook. So the first instruction is to enter your name and what you call your mental illness, remembering back to one of those first lessons. In fact, I think it was the first lesson, right? When we talked about the fact that you don't have to label yourself as living with a mental illness to identify with, experiencing some kind of emotional struggles or difficulties about which you might want to share your story. So go ahead and name and how you identify in terms of mental health. And then the second piece that you want to do is the one that says, let me tell you about my childhood. So there's 4 blanks provided there for you. Why don't, just take a moment. You can pause the video if you want to do this now and list out some of the events in your youth that are typical of most people's lives, or that might reflect the beginnings of your experience with mental illness. We know that not for everybody, but for most people, signs and symptoms of mental illness have their onset between the ages of, about 12 and 24-ish, I believe. So usually for most people, they can talk about those experiences during that time frame. For me, I identify as living with depression and anxiety, and I didn't know it at the time, like as a kid, right? But when I look back at my childhood, I can see some definite signs of the emergence of anxiety in particular. So take a moment and fill that piece out. And then on line instruction number 3, it says list ways in which your mental illness emerged and the age that this occurred. As with all exercise in the program, do not say anything here that makes you feel uncomfortable. You share what you feel comfortable sharing. It doesn't have to be everything about your story, right? Or it could be. It all depends what you're ready for. And you only need to discuss those things that you feel okay sharing. Okay, so take a moment to do that piece. This is where my mental illness started when I was about blank years old, and then you're going to list some of those difficult things that happened. And then the next part, you see it says, unfortunately, my mental illness did not go away quickly. So you're going to list some things that you've struggled with over the past several years due to your mental health conditions. This may sound a little funny, but what this is doing is it's qualifying you. It's letting the person that you're talking with know that, yeah, this isn't just like, everyday challenges. This was some significant hurdles that I faced related to my mental health. Now the next piece, so take a moment and fill that out. You can pause the video if you'd like. The next piece is that recovery component that's so very important. So you'll see it says, I found my path of recovery living with my mental illness. What works or has worked for me includes. So there you're going to want to list some achievements and accomplishments and the things that worked to help you achieve those goals. The next component, so you can pause to fill that out. The next component is along the way, I experienced some stigma and unfair responses to my illness. And you want to list some of those experiences. That lets people know that, stigma does have a real impact on people living with mental health conditions. And sometimes that particular component of a story can inspire people to change their views about people living with mental illness. And in that regard, I think I've mentioned in a previous lesson that this program used to be titled Coming Out Proud. And the idea behind that title was, and in fact, let's go even further. It was called Coming Out Proud to Erase the Stigma Surrounding Mental Illness. So the idea that for those who do choose to disclose their illness and their associated experiences, it can be really stigma reducing for somebody to hear from somebody in their life that they have had these challenges and look, they're living and achieving their goals, maybe sometimes because of the experiences, or sometimes people say in spite of those experiences, right? Okay, so take a moment to do that. So again, I actually just foreshadowed the next piece of the worksheet. It says, despite my challenges and sometimes because of them, there's that term I think I used in a previous lesson, post-traumatic growth. Maybe I didn't, or I'm imagining it, but if I didn't, post-traumatic growth is, when you go through some hard stuff, sometimes you come out stronger on the other side. So a lot of people who live with mental health conditions, it's hard and they wouldn't really want to go through the suffering if they could help it, but they tend to think that it's made them into the person that they are. Some people feel that they're a more empathic individual because of what they've been through. Others feel like they've developed, a sense of resilience in a way. And that's kind of what we mean by post-traumatic growth. There's a quote that I really love that's something, I'm going to botch it, but it's something like, I've been through 100% of my hardest days, or I've made it through 100% of my hardest days, right? You're here, you've made it through all of them. So that shows strength. So go ahead and fill that piece out now. Like, what are some of the challenges, or what are some of the accomplishments you've had despite, or maybe because of your mental health? And then finally, this is kind of scripted for you, but it's really important that there's these key points that come at the end of your story. The first is, I, like all people with mental illness, live and contribute just like you. That's stigma busting, right? And then, so please treat me the same. Do not view me based on any unfair stereotypes. Those are the messages that you want people to take away from your story. So really, it's important to just remind yourself that this is your story, and ask yourself, what do you want to say? You probably don't want to communicate everything in the worksheet. You might want to reflect back on the goal that you set for yourself in terms of disclosure, which was on worksheet 1.3, and I forgot to turn my email buzzer off. Sorry about that. So one thing you might want to do now that you've written this all out, and I know that you've completed an electronic version, so maybe you do this when you get the email with the completed worksheet. Go through and circle the information in that worksheet that you think is important to for the person that you're disclosing to hear fully. And then put a line through anything that you think is maybe too personal. Some people think that sharing details about things like maybe an assault that they experienced might be a bit too personal for them. For others, it might not be, right? Maybe that's an important part of your story. Or there might be some things that are your reality that maybe the other person might not understand fully. Like the example that's provided in the workbook is, sometimes I hear God's voice, right? That can get confused with voice hearing that is like of clinical significance, but that might not necessarily be the case for you. That might be that you are a religious individual and you believe that you hear God's voice. So anything is fair game to either include or not include in your story. Just make sure that you're intentional and thoughtful about what it is that you do decide to include. Okay, so finally, now that you've gone through this worksheet, you've kind of scripted out a story that you would want to tell, say it out loud. So take 5 minutes now, pause your video, find a quiet space. You can go through it in your head. I oftentimes find, though, that it's really, really helpful to read something out loud. And just remember that you'll only get more comfortable with the story as time goes by and the more you say it out loud. So it might not come out perfectly the first time you say it, but the more and more you practice it, the better, and the more comfortable you'll feel with it. Pause your video now and go ahead and do that for 5 or so minutes. Okay, now that you're back, let's finish up lesson 1, task 1, by completing worksheet 3.2, which is the quality of your experience, or reflecting on the quality of your experience. So you're going to use that 7-point scale that's in your worksheet. You can go to the electronic versions, and you're going to just reflect on how it felt to tell your story, whether it was in your head or out loud. How empowered did you feel after telling your story? Was it therapeutic for you? How anxious did you feel? And how positive was your experience telling your story? And, clearly this is going to look a little different if you're alone in your room as opposed to actually with another human being. So maybe the first time that you actually do tell your story, to another person or people, you may want to go back to this and see how you feel when you actually do it for real. And then the box on the bottom just isn't a space for you to note anything that's not already been discussed about the quality of your storytelling experience. Okay, so that is the end of task 1. I will hand it over now to Carter, who will lead you through tasks 2 and 3.
Cool. So yeah, we'll start task 2. So task 2 is all about reflecting on either a disclosure that you've done in the past, or maybe one of the examples we've done throughout this lesson so far, and thinking about what you liked about it, things you would have changed, what your goal was for it. So we'll go through, let you think of a specific instance, and then we'll kind of analyze through it. So worksheet 3.3 is what we're going to be working on. And so the first thing it's going to ask you to do is indicate somebody who you did disclose to. So like I said, it could be a disclosure maybe that you did 4, 5, 6 years ago, or it could be, like I said, one of the examples that you did in one of the previous lessons. So you'll put the person, and then if you can remember, it's the conversation date. So, it's obviously not critical, but if you've got a rough estimate, or if you do know the exact day, go ahead and just fill that section out. So the whole point of this is it's helpful for keeping track of successful or unsuccessful elements of a disclosure that you did. So again, we're going to look at things that you did like, if the goal that you were looking for originally ended up happening, something you would have changed, anything like that. So that would be, the idea would be so that you could alter future strategies for any other disclosures that you are planning or that you're soon going to be attempting to go for. So the next thing you'll do is consider what the goals were for disclosing to this person, because again, you always want to make sure you have a goal in mind, because last lesson we talked about how there's always impact whenever you disclose to somebody. So it's always good to have that goal in mind. So for that next section, you'll put what your goal was in that specific disclosure. And then in the next box, you'll note what you said to the person and try to be as specific as possible, because again, here the idea is to look at details, things you did and didn't like. So the more specific you can be, the better. So again, this is to help keep track of keywords that were good, things that you said you didn't like. So again, just emphasizing as much detail as you can get, the better. And then for the next box, it's going to be how the person reacted to the disclosure. So you're going to be thinking about how was their body language? Did they say something that maybe felt harsh or something that was accepting? Think about how you thought they felt, or if they told you how they felt, even better. So yeah, again, it's also important for you to note tone of their voice, body language, especially if it doesn't seem to match what they were verbally saying. And then finally, you can rate how satisfied you were with the exchange, if you thought it was positive, negative, somewhere in between. So you'll have another scale that you can sort of rate that on. And then those ratings will get added up. And so again, these added up total results are sort of a suggestion, but if it's greater than 10, that suggests that it was probably a successful disclosure, one that you would do again, something that you liked to do. And if it was less than 6, that means it probably didn't go as well as you thought, and you might want to reevaluate what you did, what you said, maybe a different setting, a different time, something like that. So that would be less than 6 on the total. And between 6 and 10 means that, it was maybe satisfactory, but there's something maybe you wanted to change or something along those lines, that it was sort of okay, but you would have liked something different. So we'll go ahead and let you take a few minutes, pause the video, and just sort of work through that worksheet. And then we'll come back and we'll do task 3. So now that you've worked through that worksheet, hopefully that gave you some good insight on a previous disclosure you did, so that you can think through it and sort of have some new strategies if you didn't like something for any future disclosures. So that's a good worksheet to have filled out. So now we'll move on to task 3, which is putting everything from all the lessons that we've done, all the worksheets, into one big summary, analyzing it all and seeing really what you like, what you don't like. So learning objectives will be summarizing insights from the worksheets provided in this workbook. So again, we're going to be looking at all the worksheets we filled out, all the methods of disclosure, who you disclose to, how you'd want to disclose, all those different things. So make sure you've got access to those worksheets if you can, because it'll be helpful for filling out this final worksheet. And then we'll also decide how you'd like to move forward with the issue of disclosure. So after you've analyzed all that, you'll sort of have the chance to think, okay, do I like this thought of disclosure? Do I like the way I did it? Do I want to change how I did it? Or, maybe before I thought I liked doing it face to face, but now thinking through it, maybe a social media disclosure would work better. So we'll analyze through all those worksheets. So yeah, this is sort of a pause for insight and direction over everything that we've done. So this will be worksheet 3.4. So we are going to work through each of those questions. I'll let you pause anytime you need, but I'll just sort of walk you through each one so that you know what they're looking for, so that you can make sure you're getting a good analysis. So these questions are meant to promote a sort of discussion, whether it's with somebody else, just with yourself. This is really to get you to think, really analyze what you've written down in the worksheets, past experiences, so that you can really decide what you like, what you didn't like. So like I said, I'll go ahead and walk you through worksheet 3.4. So the first part that it asks is just sort of a general question of what did you learn about stigma and disclosure from this program? So again, sort of the idea of the program is helping you disclose, find what's a good way of disclosure, pros and cons of disclosure, and also just pushing back on stigma. So we want you to just sort of think back on everything you've learned, see if there's any new insights you've gotten. So that's just sort of an area for you to think back on the program as a whole. And then for the second question, it's asking what are the costs and benefits of you disclosing? Might you come out in some places and where? So this would be looking back at worksheet 1.3. So this is looking for, maybe you disclosed somewhere before that was a public space, but you didn't like that. So maybe you think, well, maybe I'd do it in a private space next time, somewhere quiet, something like that. So it's, again, worksheet 1.3, looking back at the places you think you would most likely choose and the settings. Then the next section is worksheet 2.2. That would be the ways that might work for you in terms of disclosing. So this is selective disclosure, indiscriminate disclosure, broadcasting. It's those 5 different methods of disclosures. This would just be listing the ones that you think would work best for you. Then next is how do you want to disclose? This is worksheet 2.3. This would be face-to-face, social media, online call. It's those 3 different ones. And then you can get more specific with it if maybe you think social media is good. Maybe you like the thought of a direct message on social media, not necessarily a public post. So that's the section that's looking for. Then next is how did you feel about stigmatizing responses from others? This is worksheet 2.4. So this was talking about how we did that test where we determined if somebody was giving positive, negative responses. So this is how you're looking for responses from others, what you think about stigmatizing responses. So again, just sort of a reflection question on that. And then next is sort of a more general question of just what do you think of your story? So this is the first 2 worksheets that we did in this section and how much you improve it. So again, that's worksheet 3.1 and 3.2. So again, this is looking back at your stories. Was there something you said maybe that you didn't like? Or was there a response you got that maybe you think, oh, well, maybe that person wasn't a good response? This is what parts of your story that you told did you like and did you not like? And so then the last part of this would be, given all of this, list 3 things that you might do in terms of coming out in the future. So again, this is taking everything that we've talked about and giving yourself 3 main points of things that you might change, or like maybe you really liked that you did it face to face. So you might say, I always want to do face to face, something like that. So this would be 3 main points that you've learned from this that you know you'd like to do going forward with disclosure. So yeah, go ahead and take a few minutes, pause the video, and work through this. It might take you a little bit because, like I said, it's in depth. It's trying to go through everything that we've learned so far. So yep, just go ahead and pause the video, work through that, and we'll come back and wrap up. So I'll go ahead and let Dr. Kosyluk wrap it up for us, since that was the last lesson. And hopefully you guys got some good information out of it.
Yeah, we hope that you really got something from this. Carter, thank you for being an awesome facilitator. We're very lucky to have you. This program, I hope that you might share your experience with others who might be interested in participating in something like this. My hope for you would be that you'll walk away feeling a sense of empowerment, even if you choose not to tell your story right now. I hope that you feel more like you're making a choice not to tell your story in the moment, as opposed to being forced into secrecy by stigma. So that's really the whole point of the Up to Me program. Is it's not to convince you to disclose, it's to prepare you to disclose should you want to, because there's lots of benefits to disclosure. But really, it's about empowering you to make that choice and giving you the tools to do that if that's what you should choose to do. So it's our hope that you had a really good experience with this program, and we're glad that you were here. You can always feel free to reach back out to our team at any time if we can be of any assistance to you. But now you have this manual, you have your worksheets, and you could go through this all over again from the beginning on your own if you wanted to, as many times as you need to feel, like you are in charge of your story and who gets to hear it, who has the privilege of hearing it. So thank you again for being here with us, and we wish you all the best.
Thanks, guys.
Bye. Okay, that's a wrap. Well, that was fun.